On today's PMEA's Take Note podcast, we are talking with Alfred Watkins, big name in the band world, retired band director from Lassiter High School. That is all on today's PMEA's Take Note podcast, presented by the Slippery Rock University Music Department. Well, hello, everyone. I'm Mark Desmatakis. Welcome to this Take Note podcast. And I have to tell you, I've been excited for a lot of podcasts that we've done. I am really excited for this one. If I have my band director Hall of Fame, I would say that Alfred Watkins is up there, and he is our guest today. Alfred Watkins is the retired band director from Lassiter High School in Marietta, Georgia. Point of personal privilege, I kind of came to know them in my high school, post-high school years as kind of one of the bands in the country. Won 2 Bands of America Grand National Championships. Alfred is a name that you know if you've been involved in the Midwest Clinic and kind of if you've just been in the band world. So I am extremely excited to have the chance to talk with him today. Alfred, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Mark. It's a pleasure and a privilege to be a part of your podcast today.
Well, we have a lot of topics to talk about because I'm just so curious for your take on things. So let's start with, a 30,000-foot broad level question here. Okay, so looking back on your career at Lassiter and then even what you've seen as you've been retired, what's kind of your long range view of how music education has changed? Is that, from the marching band field to the concert band stage, what are your kind of observations on what's happened in the field?
My gosh, that's a very broad question. And having been in the profession for 37 years in the actual classroom and now being retired for 9, that's nearly a 50-year window of looking at the band world from 1976 until now. I'll give it a shot.
Okay.
It depends on which part of our world, or which genre within the band world we're discussing. I'll just start, since we're in the fall season and the leaves are changing, I'll just start with the marching band program. And marching bands have gone from the old Cassavant and Bill Moffitt systems of squad drills to more free form and now props and costuming, and we've gone in a myriad of directions. We've not always made place for everyone. Marching bands are cultural entities. If I see the Ohio State Marching Band in the performance, they don't dot the I with a sousaphone player, I'm disappointed. It's just part of the fabric of that culture. If I see my alma mater at Florida A&M University and they don't do what we call the rattler, which is marching at 6 steps a second, then I'm disappointed because they've done it for 50, 60 years. So you've got those kind of traditional programs. As a high school band director, I've seen a myriad of things. I've seen band directors that will emulate either the Ohio State band or Florida A&M band or a drum corps. And in many ways, we moved in separate quarters, in separate corners, and one hand doesn't quite know what the other one is doing. And that's one of the things that I've noticed, is that having developed programs on all different types of levels, particularly the last 25 or 30 years, when I did Bands of America competitions, I was an adjudicator for them for about 25 years. And that was a prize organization that very few bands, quite honestly, in the country could move in that direction. Some of it was cost. And the biggest change now is the absence in that activity, is the absence of music, acoustical music coming from the wind and percussion students. There seems to be an infusion of the electronic sounds that people tell me that is new. And I want to tell them that the amplifier was invented at the turn of the century, the last one. It's probably not new. It's just a variation to that. But what it does is that it minimizes the relationship between the teacher and the student to play an instrument acoustically. I think there's still something very, very valuable about that. We amplify the opera singers occasionally, but we don't change their color. We don't add tones to it. The big bands of Basie and Ellington are still out there, and the saxes might be Mike, but the rhythm section is still on the left side, and the winds on the middle. The symphony orchestra still does what it does, and it presents itself how it presents itself. You go on stage to hear Celine Dion concert, there's a star on the floor that she goes to. She's gonna go to the star in the spotlight here. So there's certain things in the genre that kind of have to be in place. So the marching bands sometimes are a little different ways. With regards to concert repertoire, the school band movement, because of the plethora of students that have come through the school band movement in the last 50 years, particularly in our country, has elevated the skills across the board. The middle school bands now play what upper tier high school bands play. The upper tier high school bands now play what the universities can play. And the universities are moving to smaller ensembles that are more one per part, kind of out of the Eastman School of Music genre. And so that has morphed it around. The interesting part about that conversation is that the ones that have held true to their heritage are the jazzers.
Right.
Jazz musicians still live in the world of Charlie Bird Parker, Duke Ellington, Count Basie, and Louis Armstrong. They still pay homage to that, although they're adding all the new sounds and new colors and new textures. But if you're gonna swing, you gotta listen to the Basie band, and you gotta sound like the Basie band with some variations. And so they have done probably the best modeling of maintaining what we have and moving it forward. The choral division, for an example, is probably our most ethnically diverse musical programs that we have. The program division never left the European concept, but they sang spirituals. And spirituals are now still a part of the normal choral vocabulary. That's not the case in the band world. The spirituals which jazz came out of became taboo in terms of the Western art form, and we lost it in terms of how our everyday curriculum. But the choral divisions didn't. They did swing choirs and they did all the other kind of choirs, but the core, but everything branches off from their core subject matter. So I've seen a lot of change through the years. The things that excite me are what young people are able to do with their ears and with their creative minds and with their intellect. And I don't mean young people that are 15, I mean young people that are 10, and what they're able to do through hearing of a variety of things. So that has changed the game quite a bit, with them being able to model the sounds of a great singer or a great performer, and it doesn't matter where they are in the world. So that has brought about those the biggest change. That's kind of nutshell information on that.
Sure. Yeah, wonderful observations, and we could probably talk for hours if we went down those roads a little bit, but I want to cover a few different topic areas. So let's talk about this time that we are in, pandemic times. And so there's always been this talk about how do we build our programs. After COVID, there's talk about building our programs, but there's also talk about, rebuilding our programs. And there's resources out there and the funding is out there. I mean, the money that's out there now for education is just kind of astronomical that can be used. But you still have to do it. You still have to do the work of building or rebuilding. You've been a consultant. You have watched programs. I'm curious, for what are some of your wise words for how can folks be successful in doing that at this time that we are in, building and rebuilding? What's some advice at this point in the pandemic, or this point in, I guess, in time? Let's not even say the pandemic, in November 2021.
I having not taught during the pandemic, I was retired, and so I didn't have to do the video calls, the digital calls, and listening to students play that weren't there. I sympathize and empathize with my colleagues. I didn't have to wear the mask in the classroom. I lead an all-adult community band. We took an 18, 20-month hiatus, period. And when we went back fully vaccinated. So I didn't have to go through that part of it, but I could empathize and I understand it. This is my suggestion to the teachers. The first thing I would suggest for you to do is not to try to rebuild your program. By rebuilding your program, that means in a 5, 7, 10, 15 year period, you'll only be as good as the last program you had prior to the pandemic. And so it gives us a chance to do it again, to start them over, to build them differently than we built them the first time. It's kind of like if you have a house or a business and it accidentally and regrettably burns down. And the insurance company says, you know what, you've got something left here. We can do this again. And we have a foundation and it's all in place and at no cost to you, you can build this house over again. So just tell us what you would do differently the second time. And I can't imagine anyone building it exactly the same way the second time. So you get a chance to put a doorway here or a hallway here, and this clock never would fit here. And I wanted my grandfather's clock here, but there was no room for it. So everyone has a chance to restart our programs. And we're the captains of our ships, the individual teachers in the classrooms, and we all have to look inside of ourselves after taking 16 to 20 months of a hiatus from the everyday activity and not try to rebuild it. Just try to find a new house. And if now I have the chance to start this all over again, what would I do if I have the chance? So every teacher has that responsibility. And you don't want to go back and chase your tail all over again. You don't want to take the marching band out and go to the same competitions you've done. All you're going to do then is end up comparing this band to the previous band, and one of those bands is going to lose. It's like comparing children. Mm-hmm. And so you don't really want to do that. If you look back on my career, you'll see with the Lassiter band, we didn't do the same events twice in a row. I never went back. The band competed in 230 marching band competition. I never went back as a defending champion, not one time. We won 120 of 130. So I never went back the next year as the defending champions. I wanted to find some new areas, some new communities to play in. But I didn't want to compare this one to this one because one of them will lose. So we have a wonderful opportunity, but I would like to make a suggestion to the teachers on some thought from 45 years in the profession. We're not the same America as we were prior to the pandemic, artistically, musically, culturally, socially, or emotionally. Now is the time to find out what are we truly teaching in the classroom and what do we truly believe? Do we truly believe that every child deserves an equal and fair music education? Or is it only for those students that seem to have an interest in European classical music we put into our classroom? You've got to recognize that the African American, the Latinx part of our communities, according to the 2020 census, was 31%. Well, that's just about a third. That doesn't count the Native Americans, that doesn't count the Asians, and it doesn't count the Latinx community, nor the women that are oftentimes not represented in all of our programs in terms of compositions, in terms of clinicians, in terms of, so we get a chance to rethink that. And so now that we have a chance to rethink it, you must also recognize, as far as I'm concerned, from my perspective and from my eyes, having had families in this country for several generations, then because of the social climate that we've been placed upon for the last 5 or 6 years, America's a different place now. And we're not that melting pot that we said that we were. America's a salad where the cucumber keeps its flavor and the tomato keeps its flavor and the avocado keeps its flavor, rather than taking that and turning it into some kind of a mush that it ends up being something. It can be an American fabric. Or riding the subway in New York is normal. We're looking at the Golden Gate Bridge is all a part of us. And I get all of that, but I don't want to lose my personality and my ethnicity and my soul to blend it in someone else's. I want you to learn me. And I think your students are saying the same thing to you, but at 67 years old, I can tell you, at 7 to 10 to 15, they can't. We just went through a horrendous period of racial strife in our country that we're still in. We're still in the middle of it. There's the George Floyd police shooting, the Breonna Taylor shooting, the Ahmaud Arbery massacre in my home state of Georgia. The trial's going on today. I'll watch it as soon as I get off this. Has impacted all of us, particularly people of color, and we hope that it impacts the rest of the country. But we're a different country now. So you must be, in my impression, a lot more empathetic to the needs of all of your children, not just the ones that choose to sit in the front of the classroom. Those are the same ones that have always had the opportunities and the privileges. And so, and so how do you do that? Well, you play music from a broad section of America. You don't always have to play Bach chorales. Bach died in 1750. You can play a beautiful tune by a Willie Nelson, some melody in beautiful harmony. Whitney Houston had the same tune. Michael Jackson had the same tune. Celine Dion had. We called it good music. Melodic construction, harmonic interaction, rhythmic interest. We all identified as good music, but it wasn't that music that we were taught in our European-based classrooms. So now we get a chance to start over again. So rather than just playing a Bach chorale, find a Luther Vandross piece, find a Kelly Clarkson piece, and arrange it on Sibelius and Finale. And we can all do that because of our theoretical backgrounds. And you place that piece in the hands of the children, and they will love it equally as well. You don't have to take Bach out to add Kelly Clarkson in. But you certainly can't tell Kelly Clarkson she doesn't have a place. Let me give you a quick story. I was in the early part of my career, and it was a tenor saxophone player when I worked at Lassiter, which was 99% Caucasian when I first started there. And a tenor saxophone player had this, what I considered to be at that time, this horrible, horrible sound from the 1950s. And I said to the kid, you sound just like Boots Randolph. And if you don't know Boots Randolph, he was a famous saxophone player that played in the 50s. Yakety Sax was one of the first recordings of the saxophone solo that we all heard 40s and 50s. And the little boy's face lit up and took it as a compliment. And he said, Boots Randolph was my great granddad, or granddad, I can't remember. And I thought, oh, he was a wonderful musician. Congratulations. And I almost stepped in it because I almost told him that's the worst saxophone sound I think I've heard in 10 years. But he taught me that that was in his ear and it was quite acceptable. And I had no right to change it. So what I did was I added another sound to his already a fixed vocabulary. And when I needed Boots' sound in the jazz band, he had it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and when I needed Don Sinta's sound in the concert band, he had that also. And so that's what we do. We add on to what we already have.
And so to emphasize the point, and we talked about this before we started recording, that as you are thinking about repertoire, it is not or, it is and. Yes. We're not saying get rid of the things that have been part of music programs. You can still do that, but it's finding the other things that are out there that you can add on that are so valuable.
It's very simple. We do it in our everyday life. We do it in our everyday life. There are percussion players every place that play, and marching bands that play Kevlar heads on snare drums. It doesn't mean that you throw the plastic heads out of the timpani. Right. We added the Kevlar heads and didn't even think about it. We do it in our wardrobe. We do it in our attire. We do it in our pictures behind our wall. You have canvas pictures behind your head now, where the picture kind of goes around the side, and it's kind of neat that way. I have one right here. I didn't throw out everything else. I just added those. So the individual teacher, the classroom teacher, is in charge of. You're the captain of the ship. You're in charge of what music goes into the minds, spirits, and souls of your students. So no, you don't throw out Bach. You don't throw out the whole suite. You don't throw out the Hindeman Symphony. You don't throw out the B minor mass, but you add other pieces into your repertoire. And folks, quite honestly, we've been sold a bill of goods as classroom teachers that America didn't buy. We were all trained as a rule in our music school in the European concept of music. It's the organization and structured music. It does give us the fundamentals. It's kind of like riding a bicycle with training wheels on it. The bicycle with training wheels on it is just great. It teaches you balance, it teaches you speed, it teaches you this. But once you take the training wheels off, then the bicycle has a different speed and a different mobility. So our formal training gives us that. And I don't think that deviating from our basic formal training to produce great sounds, the ability to read, the ability to be able to interpret anything in the arts is bad. There's a difference between Michelangelo and Rembrandt. We've studied that as professional artists. Doesn't mean that we shouldn't understand Jackson Pollock throwing paint on the wall, but you add all of those to the artist, and we all become broader. And so that is what I would suggest that I endorse, is not throwing it out, but adding to it. But our goals to produce a band that can go to evaluation and make a superior rating, or play at the state conference, or play at the Midwest, or go to Grand Nationals. Those are individual goals that the teachers have through our ego. They make us look like we are doing something correct. We can post that on social media that we're doing that, and it says, look at me, look at me, look at me. And then we've forgotten about the children for the sake of ye old person. It's kind of how we're wired as classically trained musicians, which is most of our music schools. The classical major is the great art, symphonic, or whatever you choose to describe. And to those snobs out there, I know the classical period was a 39 period that where Beethoven was a centerpiece. I got all that. We got to give it some kind of a name. And so my suggestion is to build a new curriculum that includes all of these elements. And it's incumbent upon the teacher to do the study. So the band directors out in the house, find listings of women band composers, grade 1 to grade 6. There's a zillion of them out there all over the world. It's incumbent upon us to find them. Find teachers of color, find African-American colors. There are 56 to 58 that are composing today that are published, not published, either self-published or published composers that are living today. You have to go back to find William Grant Steele, although that music is still terrific. And find that, and you can go through any genre, but it's our responsibility to do that. And you can still get to state conventions.
Right.
You can still get to the Midwest Clinic. You can still get to Grand Nationals.
Right.
And so you that is how you do that. I played in 1986 in my first conference with the Lassiter Band, 1986. And I played a Little Red Schoolhouse by William Grant Steele as a part of my concert, 1986. I hired the first woman band director at my school in 1987. So I'm not Johnny come lately to the show.
Yeah. And
I've been on the train for a long time.
To a point that you also made earlier, that is just part of kind of the natural course of what you're doing. You are not shooting off fireworks whenever you do that. It is just part of, hey, we are playing a piece by this female composer or whatever it is, and you just move on. That's just
we have program notes.
Yeah,
we have program notes, and it's at least describe the Chaconne idea of a whole suite. And then kid was all it's the same melody. Yeah, well, it turns upside down over here, but it's the same melody. Oh yeah, well that's a Chaconne, blah 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 blah. So we describe that, and we'll discuss the history of Gustav Holst, and we'll discuss everything surrounding him to bring his piece to life. And we'll show him that the march is a little different than the American march, but nevertheless, it's intended for us to kind of move to. And so we do that with every piece, hopefully, that we play, as bringing our performers into our work. So then when you play the music of Omar Thomas, or the African-American composer Kevin Day, you just mentioned he's a brilliant young African-American composer. He's working on his doctorate at the University of Texas, and we'll Zoom him in for a conversation to help us play this piece of music as you would any other living composer. And by doing that, you've done an enormous amount for students in school. Like, oh, I didn't know. You've not lived until you've led the Lassiter Band and come back from Grand Nationals in 1998 and winning the national championship according to that set of standards. And stop in Paducah, Kentucky at McDonald's, and someone sits behind the counter says to me, bus drivers get their food for free. You've not lived until you take it till you're on the way back to the national championship. So you've not walked a mile in my shoes, and you can't, but you can certainly be empathetic of how the world sees from me. So that is the empathy and the awareness of the classroom. Doesn't mean you have to take anything out. You bring everything else in.
Well, I mean, that's another area we could probably get on the road and talk 2 or 3 hours about, but
I just slid it in there.
Yeah, well, no, that's wow. Lots of profound stuff there. And so about how you know, as a music teacher, you are a leader, and you're right. You're the leader of the program. So when you're making those decisions, you know, that is on you, and you are creating that culture in your program. So, all right, let's fast forward here a little to your retirement. So you're not sitting still. You've mentioned this community band, the Cobb Wind Symphony, that you started, an adult community band. And now you've done something else. You're the co-founder of the Minority Band Directors National Association, MBDNA. Tell us let's just start with the baseline. Tell us about the group. What is it?
It's a group of about 2,000 ethnic minority band directors. We began the organization in 2011. I did an in-service in one of the local school districts where almost all the teachers were African American. And I did a week-long in-service with them, 8 hours a day for a week. At the end of the week, they said, Alfred said, would you help us? Maybe we could have some kind of a union so we can, so we can share with people that look like us from all over our region. So we formed it up through several meetings and had a 3-year stint, and it kind of slowed down because we were all teachers and all high school band directors, high school middle school band directors. And so it's resurfaced itself 4 years ago with a Facebook group, which we had. And so when social media came through, and we developed the group to have 4 pillars: to serve, promote, mentor, and celebrate ethnic minority teachers. The intent was for me to connect that group of teachers from California to Maine, from Florida to Washington State, because we, as minority teachers, we had no vehicle to be a part of. And so we created one. And like I mentioned earlier, we have 2,000 teachers. And on the social group, we mostly celebrate what's happening out in our neighborhood. There's a Shelby Chipman in Florida that is the FMEA president. The Johnny Hamels in North Carolina, that's the NCMEA president. And without this group, the whole country likely of minority teachers may not have known. And there's one of our teachers, Jose Diaz, who was just honored at the Country Music Association. So what we do is we find out what's happening as the band director. Had a wonderful Latin jazz summer clinic he's had for 25 years. Jose is on the Midwest board, for an example. And so by highlighting Jose in our in-house grouping, everyone knows who he is, who's been honored. So it's that kind of networking that we're creating. We have had 40,
No, go ahead.
We've had 40 master classes and clinic sessions over the last 2 years. Anywhere from an hour with Wynton Marsalis to an hour with Anthony McGill, the principal clarinetist, the New York Philharmonic, who happens to be African-American, to DeMondre Thurman, euphonium professor at Indiana University, Rodney Dorsey, professor at Indiana University, the band director there, to Tanya Mitchell there at Penn State, who happens to be a caller. So we've had 40 one-hour sessions with people of color that are significant. And they are available to our members within our Facebook and our website community. So what we're trying to do is develop our community and assist it first, and then allow for the rest of the country to have a positive impact and be involved in what the African American community is doing. We just commissioned a work, grade 4 work to be done by Kevin Day, the African American composer. Next year we'll have a Latinx likely composer and a jazz piece, a middle school piece. And so that's kind of the direction that we're moving into, promoting, serving, mentoring, and celebrating in the ethnic minority community.
And so how can folks get involved? How can they join up and be part of this community?
You can follow us on www.mbdna.org. And if you are an ethnic minority teacher, you may join our closed Facebook group. If you're not an ethnic minority teacher, I'm sorry, right now, there are other organizations that are probably more germane to you. But they are ethnic minorities. They are able to join that through a Facebook group. There's a request, and we allow them to come into that closed space.
And so that's a conversation area that, and I love when you say mentoring. That's, to get to connect. Anything that happens in association, I think, is always important because there's mentorship when you're meeting other folks. But I would imagine in a group like this, that mentorship piece is really extra.
Yeah, it all kind of happens organically.
Yeah.
And the only items that are posted either serve the community, They promote a certain mindset of positivity and promote excellence. And we celebrate any excellence that happens within our community or within our states and areas that may not become national news. And we certainly celebrate the excellence that's happening in all of our communities. And so that is and there's an educational intent. So someone will say something about which method books do you use? And another person will say, I use these. Well, I'm looking for some chorales that are not just Bach chorales, and someone that has already arranged them or know them will have them, and that connectivity will happen. And that's kind of what it is, a professional space where that they're sharing of those types of ideas.
So I would invite folks to go to mbdna.org and learn about it. And I think we'll definitely be hearing a lot more about it in the future as you continue to grow it, especially as these pieces are commissioned. So congratulations to you on growing it and this wonderful achievement. But also thank you so much for taking the time to talk today. This has been a thrill for me to just get some of your insight on some of these areas. I can't thank you enough. High school me certainly can't thank you enough for taking this time to chat.
My pleasure. Just remember, everyone, that there's a great wise carpenter that said, if you teach a man if you give a man a fish, he will eat for a day. But if you teach a man to fish, he'll eat for a lifetime. So we're teachers, and our goal should be to develop a lifetime of musical learning and musical love, as opposed to solving of many problems as you go along. That's giving them a fish for the day. So thank you so much, Mark, for inviting me in, and I will certainly take note of what you're doing in your activity from here forward.
Absolutely, and we will certainly stay in touch. So Alfred, thank you for joining us. To all of you, thank you for joining us on PMEA's Take Note podcast, presented by the Slippery Rock University Music Department. We will see you next time.